Hi, Eric here with 30 by 40 Design Workshop. This is part 3 in the video series talking about the design of my small studio. In part 3 we're going to be talking about the plan diagrams. We've already talked about part 1. In part 1 the concept, so we have an underpinning idea that's informing the design. That's very important to start with. Second video we talked about the site and how the site was going to shape this building. In this third video we're going to talk about developing the floor plan. And the development of the floor plan always starts with a diagram. Once we understand something about the site, we know where this building is generically going to fit. We have to start thinking about how we're going to enter it and where the spaces inside are going to orient toward the site. So I've come up with 4 diagrams that I think are worthwhile looking at for the studio, and I'll sketch them out here just generically. I'm going to keep it a simple rectangle because I know that's an affordable shape and it's works well with the existing home that's here, and it's easy to see the spaces. Now this kind of diagramming exercise can take place for any kind of building, and even a complex building. In general, the way we think about diagrams is to come up with the greatest, the sort of largest spaces, think about their orientation and their relationships to each other. With this building, there aren't many spaces at all, so the relationships are pretty simple. With a more complex building, you'll start thinking about public areas and private areas, and those and support areas, circulation areas. Those things start to inform how the plan starts to lay out and stack together. Here we're going to be looking at a studio and a band space generically, and I'll show you in each one of these orientations. We'll flip it here. It'll be a little bit different. We also have a storage component, and so that storage component can sort of be fit in, threaded, however we see fit as the plan evolves. And I have some ideas for how to do that, and I'll sort of walk you through that as well. In the first orientation here, I'm calling this one the barn. This one I'm going to call the weighted end. This one I'll call the center end, and this one is just the weighted. Now this one, get the red pen out here. It's important in each one of these diagrams to think about how we're entering the space, because once you get in the building, that will determine sort of where you go and what spaces you head to first. In the barn configuration, I'm going to show the entry being from the side. Now what this does is it sets up a pretty nice relationship here where you enter into a central zone and you turn left, there's the studio space. If you turn right, there's the band space. This gives us an opportunity in the center to have a sort of flexible working space. This can be the place for a table. If it's on casters, it can roll and store away here. As the band is using the space, it can now sort of absorb 2/3 of this space. If the studio needs the space, it can absorb 2/3 of the space here. So it creates this nice transition zone, and also an accepting entry, a welcoming entry for clients, guests. And it creates a private work zone here and a private practice zone here. It also starts making me think that we can probably do some movable partitions or some curtains, something on tracks, maybe folding doors, sliding doors, that can really contain the band space, so that when I'm using the studio and having a meeting here, it's not sort of right in the face of the studio. So maybe that's a presentation wall for the studio. So I already like some of the things that the barn scheme is doing. It's one of the reasons why a barn was so functional. There are gable end barns where you enter on the gable, but the side entry barn was a common sort of barn configuration in New England, where the hay wagon would be driven into the center of the barn, and then the lofts on either end would be loaded with hay, and there was room for livestock on either side, and the wagon could sit in the center and be fixed by the farmer. So this is actually a really functional plan layout, so I like this one a lot. The weighted end entry here, if we're looking at this, where we would enter like this, if we have the band space here and the studio space on this end, what this requires me to do is actually subdivide off this space, because as I enter, or my clients enter, I don't actually want them seeing all the guitar amps and the drum kit, things like that. So in a small plan, adding a partition actually makes the space smaller and perhaps less functional. We're giving over more floor area towards circulation, so that can be somewhat problematic. So this is a little bit harder to pull off. If we want to separate this out as a separate space, we can certainly do that with curtains or sliding partitions, but again, now we're walking by this space. If we put the studio here, it constrains the studio space, a place that I'm working most of the time, and then the destination feels as though it's the band practice space. So some problems with the weighted end. The center end, if we look at entering sort of this direction here, it means that whatever space is sitting here is bisected by the circulation. So again, in a small plan, that's a little bit harder to pull off. Certainly it could work for the studio space. I could see a table here. Then I would be working at the perimeter, and again, the band is the destination here. It would be hard to put this plan configuration with the band here and the studio space here, because then you'd be passing through the center of the space, and with a fixed asset like a drum kit, it's really difficult to do. Now, we could sort of look at separate entries, but I don't want this space to feel any more subdivided, and I like this idea of sharing functional floor area between different functions in the plan, so I probably wouldn't do separate entries here. The last one we'll sort of look at is a weighted entry, where you sort of enter on the side here, and you have more of the studio space, more of the plan dedicated to studio space, and this almost becomes like an alcove where you can sort of open it up, almost like a stage, and so that when the studio isn't being used and the band is, this opens up fully to this. I like some of the things that it's doing in the plan, but I'm a little concerned that it's not enough space for the band practice area. So that's a sort of basic look at the floor plan exercise. Now I want to sort of step back and think again about how these would fit on the site.